Hello, I'm Jim Klein at Ashford University. This is part 3 of a quick study of federalism for students of American government. Part 2 showed how the early Supreme Court grew national power. Some opponents of this trend saw limits in the 10th Amendment, which says powers not delegated to the United States are reserved to the states. A problem with this view is that the Necessary and Proper Clause delegates power. Marshall merely relied on that delegated power. If the 10th Amendment said that national power is not expressly delegated or reserved, then one could argue against implied powers, because only expressly delegated powers would exist. But the 10th Amendment doesn't say that. In 1789, when Congress considered amending the Constitution, some thought expressly should be in the 10th Amendment. But James Madison, author of the Bill of Rights, omitted expressly. He said the amendment was superfluous and unnecessary. The Supreme Court has called the 10th a truism that adds nothing to the Constitution as originally ratified. Limits on nationalism came not from the 10th Amendment, but rather from political changes. Chief Justice Marshall expressed the pro-business Federalist outlook that led to the Constitutional Convention of 1787, seeking national protection against local agrarian populists. But the political appeal of that outlook faded. The Federalist Party's demise and the rise of parties for local interests marked a political shift. Andrew Jackson was a populist president who challenged the old establishment. When Marshall died, Jackson appointed a new Chief Justice, Roger Taney, a Maryland slaveholder, who opposed efforts to stop the spread of slavery. For 20 more years, expansive nationalism went unchallenged, but with growing conflict over slavery, Chief Justice Taney tried to use judicial power to end the slavery debate. In Dred Scott v. Sanford, the court turned away from expansive nationalism toward what became known as dual federalism, the notion that judges could enforce their own ideas of rigid power boundaries in the federal system. The Constitution gives Congress power to regulate territories and admit new states. Congress had prohibited slavery in some states before becoming states. Dred Scott, born a slave, claimed that by living in those states, he'd become a free citizen. For 30 years, this act of Congress was seen as within its power. The Dred Scott decision declared it unconstitutional. Taney held that descendants of Africans could not be citizens, and therefore Congress could not make them citizens in the territory. Taney didn't rely on the 10th Amendment, but rather on his view of the role of black people in America. In other words, Taney's limits on national power derived from his own social and political opinions. Taney's approach echoed for 80 years. Dual federalism became a way for the court to limit Congress's power over commerce, guided by the judge's free market ideology. At the same time, this ideology led courts to limit states as well. During this period, unelected judges shrank both national and state power over business. Dual federalism ended during the Great Depression. President Franklin Roosevelt and Congress passed the New Deal to fix the economy. A divided Supreme Court, guided by free market ideology, declared most of the New Deal unconstitutional. When Roosevelt tried to add more judges to change the court's direction, one justice switched sides to form a new majority that upheld the New Deal. Through this switch in time that saved 9, the court abandoned dual federalism and returned to something like expansive nationalism, but with an important difference. Today, many national policies depend on state cooperation, often bought with federal dollars. Under a model of cooperative federalism, the Supreme Court rarely limits Congress's power to legislate on local matters. Instead, unelected lifetime judges leave elected representatives responsible for making social and economic policy. That concludes our quick study of American federalism. Thanks for joining us. I hope you found it helpful.